Shadows under office lights. The rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights was a constant companion for Jessica Miller as she hurried through the marble-floored lobby of Brightline Media Group, clutching a bag of oatmeal cookies for her son and a laptop loaded with half-finished campaign ideas. It was barely 7:30 in the morning, yet the city outside was already pulsing with energy, commuters jostling for coffee, taxi horns blaring, the skyline bracing itself for another relentless day in New York. Jessica's mornings were an intricate ballet of single motherhood. At 32, she'd mastered packing her 8-year-old son's lunchbox with one hand while proofing client proposals with the other. She shouldered the weight of responsibility alone. Her ex-husband, long gone, was a shadow from a past life she'd forced herself to forget. As she navigated the glass maze of cubicles, Jessica greeted the security guard and a few early birds with a tired smile. She paused outside her office, a modest corner with just enough sunlight to keep a potted fern alive. Photographs of her son, Tyler, and a faded friendship bracelet, woven strands of blue and white, adorned her desk. Reminders of the two bonds that shaped her world, her child and Emily Carter, her best friend since college. Emily was everything Jessica often wished she could be: dazzling, unshakably confident, and always one step ahead. She had swept into Brightline a year after Jessica, instantly magnetic, gathering admirers and opportunities like moths to a flame. But despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, the women had remained close, swapping secrets over late-night pizza, dreaming about breaking the glass ceiling together. At work, Jessica was respected for her tenacity and creativity, though she often felt invisible compared to Emily's charismatic presence. Her supervisors knew they could rely on her to pull a project from the brink or calm a panicked client. But recognition came in careful measures, overshadowed by flashier personalities. Financial pressure weighed on Jessica's every decision. New York rent was unforgiving, and private school tuition for Tyler was a luxury wrung from careful budgeting and skipped luxuries. There were days when exhaustion seeped into her bones, but she refused to show weakness, especially not to those ready to pounce at Brightline's fiercely competitive environment. The atmosphere in the office was a microcosm of ambition and subtle rivalry, with friendships often judged through the lens of advantage rather than loyalty. Jessica relied on her friendship with Emily as a rare source of warmth. Morning coffee runs, shared glances at all-hands meetings, venting about difficult clients and cheating out laughter in the cramped staff kitchen. But beneath the laughter and solidarity, cracks had started to form, small at first, barely noticeable. A missed lunch date here, a dismissive remark there. Sometimes, Emily's compassion felt glazed with calculation, and Jessica's confidence flickered with self-doubt. She pushed the feeling aside, telling herself it was only the stress of deadlines and relentless office politics. Still, as Jessica logged into her computer and scanned through another string of urgent emails, she couldn't shake the uneasy sense that the greatest battles ahead would not come from competitors outside, but from the shifting shadows within her own circle. And as the office erupted into its usual buzz, Jessica promised herself to stay focused. If not for her own sake, then for Tyler, whose photo on her desk smiled back with innocent trust. Little did she know, the day's sunlight would soon be eclipsed by betrayal lurking much closer than she could ever imagine. Seeds of betrayal. The morning routine had always offered Jessica a semblance of control. A half hour in the car with her favorite podcasts, a goodbye hug from Tyler at the school gates, and then slipping into the semi-anonymity of office life. But as autumn rolled in, the air inside Brightline Media Group felt heavier, and Jessica sensed balance slipping from her grasp. It started subtly, as the most significant changes often do. Tom Preston, a senior project manager renowned for his sharp insight and calm under fire, had become a steady presence in Jessica's workdays. He was easy to talk to, quick to joke, but even quicker to notice when Jessica was drowning in deadlines. Their partnership had grown from brainstorming new client pitches over coffee to long strategy sessions that sometimes blurred into dinner. For the first time since her divorce, Jessica felt the stirrings of genuine excitement, a hopeful fluttering at the thought of someone who might see her for who she really was. But the ecosystem of the workplace, Jessica knew, was never as simple as it seemed. Emily, with her polished wit and magnetic energy, had always been in the orbit of Jessica's professional dreams, and, more recently, in Tom's. What began as friendly banter over morning bagels soon deepened. Emily and Tom started collaborating on small side projects, their laughter echoing down hallways. Jessica told herself not to mind. Tom was her friend, and Emily was like a sister. Yet a gnawing discomfort crept in, subtle as the slow lengthening of office shadows. She began to notice the changes. A missing invitation to Friday's happy hour, the way conversations between Emily and Tom simmered with inside jokes. When she stopped by Tom's office after a meeting one afternoon, Jessica caught a glimpse of the two in animated discussion, their heads bent low over a laptop, shoulders nearly touching. As she hovered in the doorway, Emily looked up with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're just finalizing a deck for the Nova Tech pitch. Did you need something, Jess?" It was nothing, Jessica told herself. But then came lunch schedules that suddenly didn't align. Emily's passing references to Tom as my favorite brainstorm buddy, and late-night texts from Tom that grew infrequent, less personal. The warmth Jessica once assumed was unique between her and Tom gradually shifted, sometimes openly, sometimes in small, silent ways. Despite her best efforts to remain composed, Jessica found her focus wavering. In meetings, she caught herself glancing more at Emily and Tom than the presentation slides. She felt embarrassment at her own jealousy, doubting whether she was romanticizing her friendship with Tom or if there was truly more between them. Jessica confided in no one, not wanting to risk appearing insecure or petty. Meanwhile, the pressure at Brightline was ramping up. The Novatech account, a lucrative, high-profile contract, was up for grabs. Both Jessica and Emily were on teams vying to lead the pitch, with Tom assigned as a key advisor. Office politics became a silent undercurrent. Every interaction weighed with the possibility of professional advancement or loss. Jessica's achievements, once quietly acknowledged, now seemed to vanish behind Emily's bright trajectory and Tom's growing deference to his new collaborator. One Friday evening, after most of the staff had cleared out for the weekend, Jessica lingered at her desk, pretending to work as Emily and Tom left together, laughing about something shared in private. Across the desk, Jessica's old friendship bracelet glimmered in the pale lamplight, a relic of trust that felt suddenly, achingly fragile. Night settled outside the Brightline windows, filling the office with patchwork pools of shadow and light. Jessica sat in silence, struggling to name the heaviness pressing on her chest. Betrayal, she reminded herself, doesn't always show up with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes, it unfurls piece by piece, an exclusion here, an ambiguous touch there, delicate as a thread unraveling in the quiet spaces between old friends. As she finally gathered her things and headed into the night, Jessica resolved to pay closer attention, not just to the shifting alliances within her team, but to her own intuition. Seeds of doubt had been planted, roots beginning to coil, yet somehow, Jessica suspected, this was only the beginning, the first blow. Jessica had always considered herself resilient, the sort of woman who could take life's punches and, with tenacity, get back on her feet. But nothing had prepared her for the quiet violence of watching trust unravel. Not in a single cataclysmic moment, but through small, deliberate actions that accumulated until they felt unbearable. The first definitive crack appeared when the Novatech project was announced as the company's next major account. It was the sort of high-visibility opportunity that could define a career, and Jessica had poured weeks of her heart and creativity into her proposal. Her late nights at the office were driven by both the desperation to secure a better future for Tyler and the silent pressure of competing with Emily, her best friend, or so she still thought. At the start of that crucial week, rumors began swirling that a strategic dream team would be formed for the initial client pitch. Tom, whose opinion carried significant sway within Brightline, was to have a voice in the decision. Jessica clung to the hope that their professional rapport and trust would tip the scales in her favor. She couldn't imagine that Tom, who had so often confided in her and sought her advice, would support anyone else. Certainly not Emily, who had only recently begun intertwining herself in project discussions. But Jessica's optimism met its first shattering blow in a meeting that Thursday, as executives circulated the conference room agenda and nervous laughter bounced off the glass walls. Tom's voice rang out, strong and confident. "I think Emily offers a fresh approach for the digital segment. It'd be smart to have her leading the Novatech pitch." A beat of silence followed, long enough for Jessica to meet his eyes. But his gaze slid past hers, unreadable. Emily flashed a gracious smile, almost apologetic, almost innocent. She thanked Tom and the leadership, while Jessica sat frozen, resisting the urge to flinch. The decision was made swiftly. Emily would head the main presentation, and Jessica would fall back into a secondary, supporting role. The reality of her loss settled in slowly, like the onset of a fever. Over the next days, Jessica observed the shifting dynamics all around her. Emily practically took up residence in Tom's office, their heads bent together over presentation slides. She breezed through brainstorm sessions, her natural charisma drawing allies and collaborators, effortlessly redirecting the team's energy toward her own vision. Colleagues who once relied on Jessica for guidance now gravitated toward Emily, eager to be swept up in her momentum. Outside work, the betrayal cut even deeper. Tom began canceling lunch plans with Jessica, texting vague apologies that felt both rushed and rehearsed. Emily, once the first to share late-night advice or gossip, became elusive or brittle in her replies. Social invitations around the office, group coffees, happy hours, began to arrive without Jessica's name included. After a particularly grueling day, Jessica returned home to her quiet apartment, barely able to summon the energy to listen to Tyler's excited stories about a school field trip. She lay awake well into the night, replaying each conversation, searching for signs she should have noticed earlier. The knowing glances between Emily and Tom at meetings, the way Emily dismissed her suggestions with a gently patronizing laugh. It was not just professional disappointment Jessica grappled with, but the crumbling of something foundational. For years, she'd seen herself and Emily as unlikely sisters, bonded by the shared struggles of women navigating an unforgiving industry. 2. See Emily now, using that closeness as leverage, left Jessica feeling hollow. The fact that Tom, once her confidant, perhaps something more, had championed Emily without warning, made the loss twice as sharp. In quieter corners of the office, whispers started to circulate. Emily's rapid rise was drawing attention. Not all of it friendly. But none of that mattered to Jessica, as she realized. The people she had trusted most had chosen a different path, leaving her behind, not with malice, but with ruthless self-interest. In the days following, the rhythm of Jessica's life changed. Where before she had greeted mornings with cautious optimism, now she moved through the hours with grim determination. Her dreams of promotion faded behind the immediate concern of survival, keeping her job, providing for Tyler, and reconstructing the battered remains of her self-worth. But beneath the ache and humiliation, a steely clarity started to form. Jessica knew the office was a battleground, and this, Emily's calculated ascent, Tom's tactical betrayal, was only the first blow. And if trust could be shattered so easily, perhaps it was time to build new resolve and plan her next move in the quiet spaces between heartbreak and hope. Collapse and rebirth. Jessica Miller sat beside her apartment window long after midnight, the city's pulse humming far below. The relentless tidal wave of disappointment from the Novatech project still lingered. It pressed on her chest with the invisible weight of everything she'd lost: trust, opportunity, perhaps even herself. She watched headlights flicker across the brick walls of buildings opposite hers, feeling utterly isolated despite the constant hum of New York life. The office had once been her haven, a place where she was valued as a sharp strategist, where her creativity and grit powered campaigns and rescued floundering projects. Now, stepping into Brightline Media Group felt like entering enemy territory. Emily's presence seemed to fill every corridor, her laughter spiraling through the halls, drawing others into her orbit. Tom, who'd once sought Jessica's partnership on every decision, barely met her gaze in meetings. Invitations to coffee vanished, and her ideas, once met with nods, now drew quick, polite dismissals. The hardest part was the indifference. Jessica would have preferred open opposition. Instead, she endured the slow, suffocating fade from central figure to afterthought. At home, exhaustion became a constant companion. She moved through her mornings by rote, packing Tyler's lunch while barely tasting her coffee, her mind numb and raw. The apartment filled with the blur of Tyler's questions and stories, small hands tugging at her for attention she struggled to summon. It wasn't a single event that broke her. It was everything. The rent past due notice, the insurance paperwork piling up, the nervous call from Tyler's private school about his recent struggles. She missed her son's soccer practice, arriving late and out of breath, only to find him alone and teary-eyed on the bleachers, while the other parents cheered in the dusk. One Friday afternoon, as the elevator doors closed behind her at Brightline, Jessica bit down hard on her lip to hold back tears. She staggered home under a cloudless sky, the city buzzing around her with its indifference. Back in her apartment, she collapsed onto the living room rug, too overcome even to cry. The silence was immense, punctuated only by the soft click of Tyler's computer in the next room. Afterwards, she moved on autopilot. She handed over the overdue rent, made excuses to the school counselor, tried to smile at her son. Each action felt unreal, as if she were living someone else's life. Friends' texts went unanswered. Nights grew long and restless. In dark moments, Jessica wondered if Emily had always planned to outmaneuver her, or if the betrayal had grown organically from small acts of competitiveness and neglect. The lowest point arrived 3 weeks after the Novatech blow, on a nondescript Tuesday. A letter from a family court lawyer slid through her mail slot, marked urgent. Her ex-husband, who rarely called, had suddenly scheduled a custody review, citing Jessica's recent instability and work-induced neglect as cause for concern. Tears burned in Jessica's eyes as she read the words, the implication razor-sharp. Jobless, adrift, and now at risk of losing the one person she loved more than anything. That night, Jessica finally broke down. She gathered Tyler onto the sofa, holding him close. He pressed his small palm against her cheek, and she realized she was crying in front of him for the first time in years. "Why are you sad, Mom?" he asked softly. Embarrassed but exhausted, she brushed his hair aside. "I'm just tired, honey. I want things to be better for us." Tyler twisted the friendship bracelet on her wrist, the one Emily had given her years ago. "I like it when you smile. You're the best when you smile." Something inside Jessica buckled, then slowly strengthened. Her son's faith in her was as pure as it was undeserved. She owed him more than collapse. The next morning, Jessica poured herself black coffee and opened her laptop before sunrise. She scrolled mindlessly through Brightline's internal portal, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But a gentle ping from her company inbox caught her attention. A message, marked confidential, from a junior account manager named Nicole. "Hi, Jessica. Sorry to bother you. I know things are tough. I wanted to reach out because I noticed some discrepancies in the reports for the Novatech account that don't line up with your initial drafts. It's probably nothing, but if you want to talk, I'm here." Jessica read the note twice. Nicole was new, a quiet woman who'd stayed out of office politics. The details she hinted at stirred something dormant in Jessica, the old analytical itch that once made her a star at Brightline. It snapped her out of inertia. She responded, arranging a coffee outside the office that afternoon. Their meeting was cautious but impactful. Nicole showed her printouts of Emily's edited reports, numbers and client comments misrepresented, feedback reshaped to favor Emily's leadership and marginalize Jessica's contributions. It was subtle, deliberate. A few other quiet voices at Brightline, Nicole confided, had also felt overlooked or dismissed in recent months as Emily's influence ballooned. For the first time in weeks, Jessica felt her fury and ambition reignite. Not as blind anger, but as a controlled heat. She realized she was not as alone as she'd believed. Emily's manipulations had left a trace, and there were others who had quietly suffered. The old strategist awoke within Jessica. She began documenting, collecting data, capturing screenshots and timelines. Instead of wallowing, she filled her evenings with reading contracts and compiling evidence. She reconnected with overlooked colleagues, mostly women and junior staffers, who'd been quietly shoved aside as Emily and Tom built their clique. A handful confided stories of stolen credit, misleading rumors, and awkward encounters brushed off by HR. Jessica became a quiet force, organizing shared Google Drives, staying late to document systems no one else noticed. The change at home was slow but certain. She signed Tyler up for weekend science workshops to make up for missed practices and apologized, honestly, for her distracted state. He hugged her fiercely each morning, his small faith restoring a piece of her own. She met with her lawyer, bringing records and a new resolve. The legal battle for custody remained terrifying, but Jessica was done cowering. If her life had to be rebuilt from the ashes, she would build it on something honest and strong. By month's end, Jessica felt a cautious optimism. She no longer expected an overnight victory, but she felt herself reassembling in pieces. Mother, strategist, survivor. Emily's star was still rising, but tiny fissures had begun to show at Brightline. A whispered joke here, a wary glance there. Trust, Jessica knew, was easy to lose and nearly impossible to regain. Yet for the first time since her best friend's betrayal, Jessica believed in her own capacity for change. She was battered, but unbroken. In the sleepless hours before dawn, she wrapped the faded friendship bracelet around her wrist, not as a symbol of lost trust, but of everything she was prepared to reclaim. Collapse had been inevitable. Rebirth, she decided, would be her own. Gathering evidence, Jessica's life settled into new rhythms, quieter, sharper, and running on a current of resolve that replaced old anxieties with calculated intent. The sting of betrayal was far from gone, but now it spurred her forward, like a wound she checked daily. No longer raw, but never allowed to fully heal. If the system at Brightline rewarded deception, Jessica was determined to play by new rules, ones built on facts, persistence, and subtlety. She began by methodically retracing her own footsteps, reviewing the vast digital paper trail of the Novatech project. Night after night, long after Tyler drifted to sleep in the next room, Jessica sat at the kitchen table, her laptop glowing in the dark. Spreadsheets, meeting notes, and version histories flashed across her screen. With Nicole's first clues as a foundation, she dug deep, comparing the earliest proposals she'd drafted to the revised files that had gone before management and, ultimately, the client. Patterns began to emerge, fields she'd meticulously completed. Budget breakdowns, audience research, even original taglines had been subtly rewritten or entirely replaced. Some of her most promising ideas appeared under Emily's login in the editing history. In email chains, Jessica saw her own questions and suggestions paraphrased, their origins obscured, with credit redirected to Emily. It didn't stop at Novatech. Other recent campaigns showed similar signs of manipulation. Jessica kept detailed notes in a private, encrypted drive, screenshots of document revisions, timestamps from the company intranet, side-by-side comparisons of her original and the final Emily versions. At first, she worked alone. Paranoia became a daily companion. Despite Nicole's support, Jessica trusted no one easily. But she moved through Brightline's open office with a new quiet confidence, her gaze lingering on casual conversations, always searching for hints of further deceit. Over lunch breaks, Jessica reached out to colleagues she'd previously overlooked, junior analysts, designers, and support staff who always seemed at the edge of the action. Away from the glass-walled conference rooms, in whispering voices and off-site cafes, she listened to their stories. Many had their own tales. A data analyst who'd submitted market research that found its way into Emily's reports with her name erased. An intern whose pitch deck concepts, once meant for a mentorship meeting, ended up on a slide Emily presented to a client. Trust took time, but Jessica proved herself as a listener and advocate. She never pressured, simply offered an understanding ear and a promise of confidentiality. In return, she gradually built a constellation of testimonies, small stories that alone might seem like office politics, but together painted a portrait of calculated ambition. She logged every account, dates, project names, screenshots, CC'd emails, version histories. The evidence multiplied. Yet Jessica knew that proof of intellectual theft alone would not be enough. She remembered how quickly Emily had ingratiated herself with senior management, winning trust, excusing errors, spinning narratives to her advantage. If Jessica were to expose Emily's pattern, she'd need hard data, evidence of more serious offenses, data manipulation, client misrepresentation, or ethical breaches that could not be brushed aside as miscommunication. That meant going deeper. Jessica pored over financial records available to her, using legitimate access to cross-check budget reports and billings for irregularities. She noticed discrepancies in backdated expense claims for recent projects. Small sums at first, just enough to slip under the radar. But when she compared Emily's project sheets with invoice dates and vendor receipts, inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. Jessica built tables that correlated all instances of mismatched reporting. She flagged invoice numbers and gathered purchase order screenshots. Parallel to the paper chase, Jessica learned more about Emily's personal maneuvers. She observed, quietly, but with a strategist's eye, how Emily continued to cultivate loyalty among key team members. Free drinks after work, social media shout-outs, group chats Jessica herself had never been invited to. One night, as Jessica left the office late, she caught sight of Emily deep in conversation with Tom outside the building. Their heads bent close, posture tense. No laughter, only low, sharp words. Jessica snapped a mental picture, adding it to the growing file of suspicion. Nicole remained Jessica's most invaluable ally throughout. The two often met after work in cozy coffee shops far from the Brightline building. Together, they exchanged developments over mugs of black coffee, sometimes joined by one or two other co-workers who found Jessica's cause worthy of quiet support. Their group was careful, vigilant. Nicole taught Jessica the finer points of metadata extraction from their internal communication platform, while another junior analyst who joined their circle provided access to archival backups. Some supervisors assumed were long since cleared. The more Jessica uncovered, the more alert she became to Emily's shifting behavior. Emily's tone in meetings had grown sharper, her smiles brighter, but brittle at the edges. When Jessica asked a pointed question or brought up a clarification about older projects, Emily changed the subject with practiced ease. Occasionally, Jessica caught Emily watching her with narrowed eyes, as though she could sense the chessboard shifting beneath her feet. The strain was palpable. Jessica felt it too, the physical ache at her temples after long nights, the anxiety of double-checking every file for traces of deletion, the exhaustion of maintaining her composure at work and her presence as a mother at home. But Tyler's quiet faith anchored her, and Jessica often found herself tracing the worn threads of her friendship bracelet and reminding herself what she stood to protect. This, she reminded herself, was not just about revenge. It was about truth, dignity, in setting things right for herself, her son, and every overlooked voice at Brightline. By late fall, Jessica's digital dossier was formidable. She sorted everything into a sequence: intellectual property theft, falsified expense reports, and, most damning, a chain of eternal emails that demonstrated Emily had deliberately misled a client to cover up a missed deadline, a misrepresentation that had cost Brightline a significant bonus. This, Jessica knew, was her moral fulcrum. Not petty office drama, but something that jeopardized the company's reputation and crossed legal and ethical lines. The question then became when and how to act. Jessica consulted quietly with Nicole and two other trusted allies. They rehearsed scenarios: HR meetings, anonymous whistleblower filings, arranging a meeting with outside counsel if necessary. Her evidence was cataloged, cross-checked, and threefold backed up. She made peace with the knowledge that exposing the truth would not just be a professional risk. It would likely upend what remained of her personal connection to Emily, as well as her carefully reassembled standing at Brightline. But for Jessica, hesitation was no longer an option. She'd gathered the evidence. All that remained was to choose her moment, step forward, and trust in the resilience she'd fought so hard to reclaim. The mask slips. The winds of late fall swept through Manhattan's avenues, bringing a subtle chill that seemed to permeate Brightline Media Group's modern, glass-walled offices. Jessica could sense it everywhere now, a brittleness to conversations that once flowed easily, a tension lurking at the corners of every meeting and break room chat. Change was coming, slowly at first, then all at once. Since gathering the evidence, Jessica had moved with cautious deliberation. On the outside, she remained as diligent and restrained as ever. But quiet word of her growing circle had begun to ripple through the lower ranks of Brightline. She didn't need to shout. Her newly found allies knew discretion was survival. Yet even the most secret efforts leave footprints. And slowly, the cracks beneath Emily Carter's polished exterior began to widen. It started with small moments, a missed detail in an email, a rare snap in Emily's usually flawless demeanor. In a Monday morning check-in, a junior designer tentatively questioned a discrepancy in project timelines, referencing data Jessica had helped her recover. Emily brushed off the query, her reply tighter than usual, her signature humor absent. Jessica noticed Emily's knuckles whitening around her coffee mug, the smallest sign of stress, and realized others did too. As Jessica walked the halls, she caught glimpses of wary glances exchanged between colleagues. An intern raising an eyebrow to her friend, an analyst ducking into the stairwell when Emily's heels clicked down the corridor. Rumors started to bubble quietly, fueled by odd gaps in project archives, contradictory announcements, and carefully worded HR memos about maintaining integrity and transparency. Emily, for all her confidence, found herself being watched, not with admiration anymore, but skepticism. With each subtle misstep, Emily's mask slipped further. She doubled down on her old tactics. Lavish praise for loyalists, impromptu happy hours, inside jokes meant to reinforce camaraderie. But those closest to her sensed a faint desperation beneath the charm, a defensive tightening of her group. Tom, previously her ever-present co-strategist, grew more withdrawn, his smiles infrequent and eyes darker with worry. Jessica watched as the once unshakable alliance between Emily and Tom shifted, tiny fissures growing more visible each day. One Wednesday afternoon, trouble arrived in the most mundane way. A routine client follow-up with Novatech revealed unexpected delays traced back to Emily's department. The client mentioned confusion over conflicting instructions and budget issues. The escalation landed at management's door. Emily reacted quickly, too quickly, deflecting blame to a junior staffer and asserting she'd been misinformed. Jessica watched the exchange without comment, her expression carefully neutral, but she felt the room's mood shifting. For the first time, leadership did not immediately accept Emily's explanation. That evening, Jessica met Nicole and another ally at a quiet bistro, hunched together over herbal tea and shared documents. They pieced together events, the growing list of errors, Emily's strained responses, and an uptick in private meetings between HR and team leaders. "She's losing control of the narrative," Nicole whispered. People are finally starting to connect the dots. Back at the office, Emily began to lash out in subtle ways. She started excluding Jessica from key update chains, forwarding tasks with little context, and red-penning Jessica's contributions with curt, impersonal notes. Once, she even staged an impromptu team brainstorming in the break room, pointedly not inviting those she suspected of siding with Jessica. The divides between coworkers became starker. The veneer of unity peeled away, and a quiet solidarity grew among Jessica's supporters, forged in shared frustration and newly acknowledged grievances. Jessica, for her part, became more visible, not less. She chose her moments carefully, asking pointed, data-backed questions at all-hands meetings, making a habit of publicly crediting colleagues overlooked in the past, volunteering for cross-team collaborations. Her professionalism and composure stood in stark contrast to Emily's tightening control. Some days, the atmosphere bristled with unspoken challenge. The tipping point came when an anonymous tip, clearly orchestrated with help from Jessica's network, arrived at HR and senior management, outlining troubling inconsistencies in the Novatech project and a pattern of misrepresenting results to clients. The report was impeccably documented, with time-stamped evidence, testimony from several employees, and a clear, methodical presentation. Jessica did not attach her name. She didn't need to. The truth had become collective property. Emily's response, when news of the investigation broke, was a study in contrast. She shrugged it off publicly, telling her department, "We've always been transparent. This is just routine." Privately, her anxiety was apparent. She stalked through the office, grilling team leads, demanding loyalty, and warning her inner circle against jealousy and sabotage. The intimidation no longer landed. Her words felt empty. Tom, caught in the crossfire, tried to distance himself quietly, but Emily's reliance on him became suffocating. Jessica, observing from the periphery, noticed Tom's growing discomfort. He had started confiding in a few trusted colleagues, including, cautiously, Nicole, hinting at pressures from Emily, and expressing regret over past decisions. The once perfect alliance now wore visible cracks. Meanwhile, management's investigation pressed forward. HR called in team members one by one, and people who once feared reprisals now spoke with uncharacteristic candor. Each interview reinforced the narrative Jessica and her allies had built. This was not a witch hunt, but a reckoning, long overdue. Jessica's evening walks home began to feel lighter, the city's chill no longer biting at her resolve. She allowed herself moments of hope, though she knew the storm had not yet broken in full. The next stage would be public, uncontainable, a confrontation that would leave no space for shadows or secrets. Soon, Emily would confront her accusers, and Tom would be forced to reckon with his role. Truth, Jessica understood, was never elegant. It arrived bruised and battered, the product of 1,000 small acts of courage. She realized her greatest strength had always been her patience, her willingness to let masks slip on their own, with only the faintest nudge. Brightline's offices became quieter, less charged with the old cocktail of fear and forced admiration. Employees began staying later, not to curry favor, but to make their case, to reclaim autonomy over their work and their reputations. Even those who had kept silent now watched Jessica with a respect tinged with relief. One evening, after everyone else had left, Jessica lingered by her office window. The city below glittered, indifferent but eternal. She ran her finger along her faded friendship bracelet. the symbol of trust and betrayal, and allowed herself a deep breath. She knew tomorrow would bring confrontation. There would be anger, maybe tears, and certainly fallout. Professional, impersonal. But she felt, for the first time in months, unafraid. The mask had slipped. Now, it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely. The fateful night of the party. The night of Brightline Media Group's annual gala arrived with the first flush of winter in New York, a city where every skyline, window glittered, and the wind always found its way under the collar of even the most carefully chosen suits. This year's event, held in a grand, lamp-lit ballroom on Fifth Avenue, hummed with anticipation and a touch of the unfamiliar. Jessica felt it the moment she arrived. Beneath the laughter and clinking champagne glasses, a current of anxiety coursed through the crowd. She stood for a moment by the revolving entrance doors, wrapped in her favorite navy dress, one she'd bought years ago in a more optimistic season of life. The faded friendship bracelet still circled her wrist, a quiet link to everything that had gotten her here. There had been parties before. She'd danced beneath these chandeliers more times than she could count. But tonight, the stakes had shifted. Tonight was not about celebration. Tonight was the reckoning. The ballroom was a whirl of sparkling decorations, hired musicians, and carefully curated playlists. Senior management mingled with department heads. The Novatech clients, in from out of state, drifted from group to group, greeted with slightly forced cheer. Jessica slipped through the clusters of conversation, every sense heightened, noting the wary glances colleagues exchanged as Emily made her entrance, Tom close behind. Emily was dazzling as ever in a crimson cocktail dress, her smile both practiced and radiant. Her movements were deliberate, now bordering on rehearsed, almost as if she sensed the precariousness beneath her feet. She flashed warmth to her admirers and called team members over for group photos, but nothing could mask the rigidity in her posture. The inner circle she once curated now hovered with visible unease, laughter thinner than usual. Jessica spent most of the first hour circling the room, trading polite greetings and watching the night unfold. She exchanged nods with Nicole and other allies in her growing coalition. They kept their distance, but Jessica saw understanding flicker in their eyes. Everyone was waiting for what they suspected might come. Dinner brought everyone together. Underneath the low, golden light, the tables glistened with crystal and silver. The CEO rose to give the usual speech, praises for innovation, a nod to the year's challenges, glowing thanks to the Novatech delegation. If there were undercurrents of doubt, they lived only in the subtext. Tom sat at the head table, his jaw set, face pale. Across from him, Emily absorbed compliments, gracious but restless, a single bead of sweat catching the light as she raised her glass. Jessica checked her watch. She had debated for days how and when to present the evidence, how best to spark both awareness and accountability. The choice of the gala wasn't accidental. In a workplace where image meant survival, only a public setting could force the truth into the open and prevent silent cover-ups. She had prepared a small, bulletproof dossier, summaries and supporting documentation, on a flash drive in her purse, with copies sent to HR, legal counsel, and the Novatech clients timed for immediate delivery. After the dessert plates were cleared and the dance floor started to fill, Jessica caught the CEO's assistant in the corridor and asked for a quick word with upper management. She'd barely finished her request when Tom approached, looking stricken. "Jess, what are you doing?" he hissed, eyes darting toward Emily. She met his gaze evenly. "Doing what should have been done weeks ago. It's bigger than all of us, Tom. You know it is. He hesitated, his composure unraveling. I didn't know half of it at first, but the client complaints, the missing numbers in the reports. Emily said it was just stress. Jessica's anger softened for a moment into exhaustion. You wanted to believe her. I know. But we can't keep ignoring the facts. They were interrupted by Nicole, who guided Jessica down the wide marble hallway to a shadowed alcove behind the ballroom. There, the CEO and two senior directors waited, faces gathered in polite suspense. Nicole handed each a printed folder, the sanitized, irrefutable evidence, while Jessica calmly, concisely, laid out the findings. Intellectual property theft, falsified expense reports, deliberate misrepresentation to a client. As they listened, their faces slipped from expectant to grim. Jessica watched their reactions, holding back the ache in her throat. She had rehearsed this speech more times than she could count. The silence that followed seemed to echo through the entire floor. When the CEO spoke, his voice was careful but determined. We will review this immediately, Jessica. Please wait here. She returned to the edge of the ballroom with Nicole, her body trembling, willing herself not to collapse. Her heart thudded as scenes from the past year flashed through her mind. Emily's conspiratorial smiles, Tom's evasions, her own months of anxiety and helplessness. For the first time, she felt the full loneliness of leadership. The moments dragged. On the dance floor, Emily laughed too loudly, surrounded by colleagues who now eyed her with suspicion. The senior manager soon emerged, calling Emily into a side room. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Conversations paused, and a hush rippled through the tables. Jessica watched as Emily extracted herself from the throng, shoulders back, chin high. She tried to catch Tom's eye, a silent plea, but Tom stared at the floor, his hands clenched white at his sides. Inside the adjoining lounge, Jessica sat opposite her former friend for the first time in weeks. Emily's mask slipped, anguish flickering in her eyes. She started to speak, but the CEO held up a hand. Emily, we've received a series of complaints and credible evidence. This meeting is an opportunity for you to respond. Emily's defenses went up at once, denial and outrage warring on her face. She denied wrongdoing, blamed stress, gestured wildly at Jessica. But the evidence was too meticulous, the facts too plain. The directors listened, stone-faced, to each rebuttal. Nicole recounted her own story, a voice from the overlooked margin. Even Tom, when pressed, admitted underweighting Jessica's influence and feeling pressured by Emily. As the questioning deepened, Emily's charisma deserted her. For every explanation, Jessica countered with proof. The narrative unraveled. Multiple files with doctored metadata, missing budget lines, client emails with revision history. The magic Emily once held over the room was gone. When she realized the tide had truly turned, her defiance softened into defeat. Management asked Jessica and Nicole to step out. In the corridor, Nicole gripped Jessica's hand tightly. They watched through the glass as Emily, tears streaking her mascara, was told the full extent of the consequences. Investigative leave, pending termination. An official apology to Novatech. A review of all projects she'd led. Word traveled quickly. Colleagues, at first fearful, now gravitated to Jessica, grateful for her courage. A few even congratulated her. Some offered apologies for not believing her earlier. Tom, shaken, sought her out in the corner of the ballroom. I'm sorry, Jess. If I'd spoken up sooner. She squeezed his shoulder. We do better now. For ourselves, for everyone she hurt. The night wound down. Jessica quietly slipped away, stepping outside into the chill, the city's commotion both fierce and comforting. She turned up the collar of her coat, the faded friendship bracelet catching the streetlight. For just a moment, she let herself feel something close to relief, a hard-earned, quiet triumph. It had been a night of loss and accountability, of confrontation and closure. The mask had shattered. Tomorrow, Jessica knew, would bring new challenges, more healing, in the fragile hope of something honest growing in the ruins. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she could breathe. Ashes and rebirth. The morning after the gala dawned gray over New York City, its clouds heavy with threat, or perhaps, Jessica thought as she sat by her apartment window, with promise. Even the skyline looked unfamiliar, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Jessica had not slept a single hour, her mind replaying every beat of the night before. The tension crackling across the ballroom, the fall of Emily's defenses, Tom's broken apology. All of it felt unreal, as if the past year had been a feverish invention of her mind. Yet the rawness in her chest served as a reminder. It was all painfully, irrevocably real. The fallout came quickly. She awoke to a stream of missed calls and emails. The company's internal Slack channel was abuzz even before dawn. Rumors, expressions of gratitude directed quietly toward her, notes of confusion and regret. Anonymous colleagues messaged their support, confiding in her about years of silent frustration and extending solidarity. For the first time, Jessica's role at Brightline was not one of quiet, invisible support, but quiet, undeniable leadership. Not all responses were positive. A handful of employees, mostly those who'd basked in Emily's inner circle, simply avoided Jessica in the hallways, their greetings stiff, their faces averted as they passed her office. Only now, after the party, did she realize how much of the company's culture had been based on fear and the pursuit of proximity to power. Change, she knew, would not reach everyone, and in the aftermath of exposure, there would be ashes before growth. In HR's glass-walled conference room, Emily faced her reckoning. Management's verdict fell swiftly. Her employment was terminated, her company privileges revoked. The news flashed through the office in an official, all-hands email, a corporate statement on accountability and integrity, worded with the cold neutrality only human resources could muster. Gossip was relentless, but for the most part, muted with relief. Those who privately suffered under Emily's charisma and subtle manipulation now found space to breathe. As for Tom, the aftermath was less dramatic, but still severe. He accepted disciplinary action, a demotion, a cut in his annual bonus, and formal apologies written to those he had disadvantaged or ignored at Emily's urging. Jessica expected to feel vindicated as she sat through these meetings, listening to managers and directors speak. But the weight of her own exhaustion eclipsed any sense of triumph. She realized with uncomfortable clarity how much had been lost. A close friendship she once considered lifelong, the comfort that came with unwavering support, and the innocence of thinking good work would always be enough. In the silence after Emily cleared her desk, Jessica sat in her own office, tears gathering in her eyes as she fingered the faded friendship bracelet, a reminder not just of betrayal, but of how much she still needed to forgive in herself. But the story wouldn't end with loss. Rebuilding began almost immediately, though the first steps were tentative and small. Brightline's leadership, shaken by what had come to light, looked to Jessica for guidance as they reevaluated office culture, reporting practices, and protocols for crediting work. She was invited to confidential roundtables and working groups, her opinions asked and respected. The very people who had once overlooked her now saw her in a new light, not only for her abilities, but for her integrity and persistence. She struggled to accept their respect at first, her inner doubts still whispering that she could be sidelined again at any moment. But with each small victory, a new workflow adopted, a promotion granted to a deserving junior colleague, an open acknowledgement of her efforts, her confidence grew steadier. Home, too, was a ground zero for reclamation and rebirth. With the case against her ex-husband resolved, her meticulous documentation and fresh character references putting a swift end to his custody challenge, Jessica finally found space to exhale. She spent more time with Tyler, who still curled into her side in sleep, as if sensing the magnitude of her triumph and pain. Their days grew richer. She made a habit of sitting with him at breakfast, no longer distracted by emails or anxiety, listening as he recounted school projects and simple joys. Sometimes at night, she'd read to him, her voice shedding its tension as he drifted off. Despite the scars, Jessica realized she no longer moved through the world in a defensive crouch. Her walks to the subway were lighter, her interactions with neighbors warmer. She even found the courage to reconnect with an old college friend over coffee, laughing honestly, if cautiously at first, about old times and new beginnings. In the process, she realized how much of her world had narrowed under stress and betrayal, and how urgently she needed to let others back in. Forgiveness did not come quickly. She grappled with anger at Emily, at Tom, even at herself for letting loyalty blind her. But it came gradually, in moments of reflection and honest conversations, in her willingness to admit just how complicated loyalty and ambition can become. She no longer flinched when she heard Emily's name in passing, when, a month later, a handwritten letter of apology arrived from Emily. Jessica read it carefully, her heart a strange mix of sorrow and sympathy. She didn't respond directly, yet, but she tucked the letter away. One day, she thought, she might need to read it again, not as a relic of hurt, but as a marker of how far she had come. Within Brightline, things slowly changed. Now others came to Jessica to confide, to ask for advice, and to seek her support for projects and promotions. She made herself available, especially to those who had suffered most under the old regime. Hard lessons had taught her the necessity of transparency, honest recognition, and standing firm no matter the cost. Bit by bit, an atmosphere of genuine respect, not cunning or competition, began to germinate throughout the office. The city outside her window remained indifferent in its noise and velocity, but Jessica's world had realigned. She was no longer working just to survive or to be acknowledged, but because she believed she could build something better for herself, for Tyler, and even for the company that had almost lost its soul to ambition gone astray. She had found her voice, reclaimed her dignity, and stood ready for whatever might come next. In the quiet of an early morning, with rain streaking the window and Tyler humming to himself at the kitchen table, Jessica finally allowed herself to smile. A genuine, grateful smile at the ashes behind her and the possibility rising ahead. The friendship bracelet. Jessica found the bracelet at the bottom of a drawer in chilly Saturday morning, several weeks after the storm had passed. The apartment was finally clean again, not just in the hurried, surface way she'd managed in chaos, but carefully, as if order might invite a more lasting peace. Tyler was at a sleepover, the first he had attended since the upheaval. The silence in the apartment felt strangely gentle, not suffocating now. And as Jessica sorted through a shoebox of old keepsakes, her hand closed around the faded blue and white band. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, the woven threads soft and familiar beneath her fingers. It was frayed now, a few beads missing, but she could remember as clearly as if it were yesterday, the day Emily had knotted it around her wrist at their college graduation. "For luck," Emily had whispered, both of them laughing, neither truly understanding the world they were about to enter. Still innocent to the price of ambition, friendship, and trust. Over the years, the bracelet had survived many seasons. Jessica wore it through her first major pitch at Brightline, through the birth of her son, through the long nights when hope felt scarce. Sometimes, after she became a mother, she'd tuck it into a drawer for fear it would break, only to slip it back on again before big moments. In subtle ways, the bracelet had been her private talisman, a symbol, she realized now, not just of friendship, but of belief in Emily, in herself, in promises made before life got complicated. Now, Jessica's relationship with the bracelet, and with the memories knotted tightly into its threads, felt complicated too. She rolled it between her thumb and forefinger, remembering how easily affection could turn to rivalry, how even the kindest gifts could become sources of pain. For weeks, she'd avoided confronting the full depth of her feelings about Emily. There was gratitude, of course, and nostalgia. But there was also anger, loss, and a sharp, persistent ache that had only dulled with the passage of time. She moved to the window, watching pale sunlight fall over the city. New York bustled as always, unchanged by her private dramas. But Jessica saw everything with new eyes. She thought about forgiveness, not only what she owed Emily or even Tom, but what she owed herself. For the first time, she allowed herself to reflect honestly, not just on what had been done to her, but what she might have done differently. There had been moments, she now saw, when she'd clung too tightly to old loyalties, missed the warning signs, or mistaken silence for strength. It struck Jessica that the bracelet was more than a memory. It was a lesson. In some ways, she realized, she had outgrown the role of quiet supporter, hidden just behind another's brilliance. She was still learning, day by day, how to lead not by comparison, but by the light of her own convictions. She considered throwing the bracelet away, as if its absence might help her close the chapter for good. But as she held it, she knew she didn't want to erase the past. She wanted to honor it, to remember how far she'd come and how the pain and joy of growth were woven together. Jessica sat down at her desk and picked up a pen. The month before, Emily's handwritten letter of apology had arrived. Words some part of Jessica had not believed she would ever read. Now, in the hush of the morning, she allowed herself to read the letter again. Emily's handwriting, round and familiar, confessed regret, exhaustion, a shallow victory at too high a cost. "I lost sight of what mattered," Emily had written. "Not just friendship, but honesty. I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me. I don't expect it, but I want you to know I'm trying." For the first time since the betrayal, Jessica didn't feel anger reading the letter. She felt compassion, even a kind of relief. She did not know if she and Emily would ever be friends again in the old, unguarded way. But sitting there, bracelet in hand, she realized that forgiveness did not require forgetting or even forgetting what had changed. It simply meant letting go of the tight hold grief, pride, and anger had on her heart. Jessica returned the bracelet to her wrist for the first time in months. It no longer felt like a relic, but a marker of transformation. She thought back to the version of herself who had accepted it as a gift. Hopeful, naive, open to the world's unknowns. Then, to the woman she'd become. A survivor, yes, but someone stronger, more discerning. And now, after so much loss, more generous to herself. That afternoon, Tyler came home, flushed from a day in the park. He noticed the bracelet immediately. "You're wearing it again!" he exclaimed, his curiosity lighting up his face. Jessica smiled, drawing him close. "It's special to me," she said softly. "It reminds me of how hard it can be to trust someone, but also how important it is to keep trying. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn and keep going." Tyler nodded, turning the bracelet on her wrist, his small fingers gentler than she expected. "Does it make you feel brave?" "Yes, in a way it does," Jessica answered. "But more than that, it reminds me that I can be hurt and still heal, that I can lose things, friends, jobs, even faith in myself sometimes, and still start again." That evening, Jessica wrote her own letter, not to Emily, but to herself. She listed the strengths she'd gained, the kindnesses she'd shown, and the boundaries she'd redrawn. She wrote about the sorrow of betrayal, the necessity of letting go, and the beauty in reclaiming hope. She promised herself that she would always value her own voice, even when it shook, and that she would look at both her scars and her successes as evidence of a life honestly lived. Before bed, Jessica placed the bracelet beside her pillow. A simple ritual, but a powerful one. In a world that seldom paused for reflection, she had created her own moment of grace. She let her heart fill with gratitude for the lessons learned, for her son's unwavering love, for the future that waited, unwritten, just past sorrow's edge. When sleep finally came, it was deep and dreamless. And in the quiet certainty of that night, Jessica Miller did not mourn the past. She honored it, one thread at a time. New doors. Jessica stood by the kitchen window, morning light sifting through the glass, painting golden rectangles across her apartment floor. It was Saturday. Tyler sat at the table, busying himself with colored pencils and ambitious dreams about rockets and distant planets. Outside, the city pulsed with energy, indifferent and alive. Jessica traced the rim of her coffee mug, letting the silent optimism of the moment settle into her bones. It had been nearly 3 months since the fateful gala, 3 months since her world was upended and then slowly stitched back together. In that time, life had not simply returned to normal. It had shifted, expanded, and taken on new hues she couldn't have imagined a year earlier. It was as if, in burning away all the old uncertainties and shadows, the universe had cleared space for something honest to grow. At Brightline, the air felt different. Colleagues who once passed with wary glances now greeted Jessica openly. Some even stopped by her office for advice or encouragement. The office felt less charged with the silent current of rivalry. There was laughter again, and a sense that people could bring real ideas to the table without fearing they'd be claimed, dismissed, or twisted by office politics. Jessica was asked to lead a new creative team, focused on ethical innovation and collaboration. She hesitated at first, old instincts whispering self-doubt, warning of new jealousies, but accepted, determined to shape a healthier culture, even if it would always be a work in progress. She worked long hours, but there was satisfaction in it now. She mentored younger employees, remembering her own ache for acknowledgement, and went out of her way to credit others. Sometimes, in the small glass conference room, she would catch a glimpse of her reflection and see not the anxious survivor of the year before, but a woman standing squarely in her own life. The wounds were slow to heal, but they became smaller every day. She still received the occasional cold glance from those loyal to the old guard, or heard Emily's name in industry conversations, sometimes tinged with pity, sometimes with blame. But Jessica let these moments pass, refusing to let them sour the days. She had learned, painfully, that not every wound requires a confrontation. Sometimes, the bravest thing is simply to walk forward and let the lessons stay behind. Home life, too, was softer, fuller. Tyler seemed lighter, sensing the change, and their evenings were now filled with simple pleasure. Puzzles on the living room floor, noisy cooking sessions, walks to the corner bakery. The court's decision on custody had been decisively in Jessica's favor. Her diligence and new network of support at work spoke volumes about her stability. Tyler's father faded further into the periphery, no longer an imminent threat, but a distant echo from an earlier chapter. Jessica took time for herself, something she hadn't dared to do in years. She ran in Central Park on weekends, meeting up with old friends and new, relearning the delight of conversation that wasn't tinged with competitiveness or wariness. One afternoon in late spring, she met an old college classmate for lunch, someone she'd lost touch with in the swirl of motherhood and corporate obligation. Their easy laughter over shared memories reminded her that the past wasn't only loss, a truth that helped her reframe even her regrets. Sometimes, walking home at dusk, Jessica would pause to watch the city's lights flickering on, one window at a time. She thought of Emily less and less with bitterness, and more with a kind of detached empathy. The handwritten apology Emily had sent still lived in Jessica's desk drawer, a reminder both of the depths people could fall to and the possibility, however slim, that we could rise again, changed, if not redeemed. One evening, after a long day of brainstorming and mentoring, Jessica sat at her desk with the faded friendship bracelet beside her keyboard. She hesitated, then fastened it around her wrist, a small private ceremony. This time it was different. No longer a relic of guilt or grief, it felt like a ribbon tying old wounds closed, a symbol of the possibility that trust, though breakable, could be repaired through resilience, not denial. As summer neared, Brightline launched its new mentorship program, and Jessica was asked to deliver its opening remarks. Standing before her colleagues, she felt her nerves flutter, but the sensation quickly gave way to pride. She spoke openly about the need for transparency, kindness, and forgiveness, both for others and for ourselves. Her words landed quietly, but she sensed a real shift in the room, an openness, a willingness to begin again. After the event, her inbox blossomed with messages. From the intern who'd been overlooked for months, from the designer who once doubted her own worth, even from her manager who thanked Jessica for reminding us what leadership truly is. She replied to each note thoughtfully, her gratitude genuine. She had learned that leadership was not the loudest voice in the room, but the one that listens carefully and lifts others up when the way is hard. That weekend, Jessica and Tyler took a day trip upstate, chasing fresh air and blue sky. They hiked a forest trail, Tyler darting ahead, then returning to grab her hand and pull her over rocks. On a sunny bluff, Jessica paused, savoring the moment, the child's laughter, the swirl of possibility, the gentle ache in her muscles. She found herself thinking, this is what it means to be alive, not to be unscarred, but to be fully here, awake to loss, to joy, to the 1,000 new doors that wait to be opened. That night, after Tyler was asleep, Jessica sat at the window and wrote a few lines in her journal, a habit she had only just begun to reclaim. The past does not erase itself, nor should it. Its lessons are stitched into me. But I am not only the sum of old betrayals and heartbreaks. I am the builder of new beginnings, the maker of open doors. Tomorrow and every day will bring risk and hope in equal measure. And I will walk through it all, eyes open, heart steady, ready. With that, she slipped the bracelet off and placed it beside her bed. Tomorrow was unwritten and wide with possibility. Jessica turned out the light, letting the hush of the city settle over her. As she drifted into sleep, she knew with certainty, whatever came, she had already chosen to move forward, and every closed door behind her only made her trust the journey through new ones ahead.